Welcome back, Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Brut. We now do our regular pre-new Daf Yomi Masechta episode, the ones that we started with, where Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Brut goes through the historical learning of that Masechta, the way the Rishonim learned it, Achronim learned it, always finds a couple of new Sfarim. When I say new, I don't mean contemporary Sfarim. Some Sfarim that might not be familiar to the rest of the world that were special to the Masechta, and now we turn our attention to Masechta's Bava Basra, the longest Masechta in Talmud Bavli, and maybe Rabbi Brot will discuss Bava, Kama, Metzia, Basra. I don't know if he will, he won't. If he ever did, plans on doing it. But we would like to thank the sponsor of this episode, and the sponsor says that his father, Olav Hashalom, always thought Bava Basra was the hardest Masechta. So here's Bava Basra throughout the ages, dedicated by Eli and Eva Genauer of Boca Raton, Florida, in memory of Mr. Couple Genauer of Seattle, Washington. We thank the Genauers for their dedication to Rabbi Brut's work. And with that, I turn it over to Rabbi Doctor.
Okay, so Masechtas Bava Basra, there's two questions that usually people always want to know, which we'll deal with very shortly. One is it really the longest Masechta? And does Rashi die in the middle of this Masechta? Because we know we have the Rashbam. So Mir Hashem, that is going to be a big important part of this speech. Okay, so first, we always talk about finding some gadol or something, some geschmack story about a gadol with the Masechta, if I'm able to. So a Talmud of someone that knew the Shagas Aryeh well, Rabbi Lezer Kalir, in his work Chavas Yara Chadash, describes in a sort of hesped on the Shagas Aryeh that he was by him, and he said he watched the following thing. He watched him chazer all of Bava Basra and all of Taisus Rush standing. It took him a few days, and then he saw him later on. He's saying in a very short period of time, the Shagas Aryeh chazered all of the Masechtas Bava Basra, and he saw this. Now, Tzidua, the Shagas Aryeh, we've spoken in other episodes, was legendary in how many times he chazer Chas. Okay, anyways, this was Bava Basra and the Shagas Aryeh. I saw also that Chaim Kanevsky actually did it in one day, one time before a Siyum for Erev Pesach. He decided to learn Bava Basra. He wanted to see if he could do it in a day. Okay, anyway, the question is it the longest Masechta? So we know it has the most blot. It has 176 blot. However, what most Tafyomi Laimdim are able to see right away, many of the blot are very short, which is good in a way. If you had to learn the Rashbam with it, forget about it. Okay, so this is a discussion. You search online, you'll find that supposedly there's a Vilna Gaon somewhere that might have said that really Bava Basra is the longest in blot, but Brachas is the longest Masechta. Okay, so today with technology, people are always very busy. Are we able to answer this question? So last year, Dr. Ari Zivotofsky, the famous from the Ari and Aris that are found in the Mishpacha magazine, from time to time they travel all different exotic places. So he writes in Jewish Action a lot of interesting articles. So he wrote an article on this Sfarim blog called "The Longest Masechta Is," and it's not Bava Basra. Basically, they made different ways of figuring out. Bava Basra does not even come in the first, second, third. And one of the ways they were able to figure out before we now have the Bar Ilan search engine that's able to do word counts, exact words, is that we have the Ksavia Minchen, which we've spoken about in the past. So it's written by one cipher, the whole Shas. So you can look at each Masechta, how long is each Masechta, because usually a handwriting of one person doesn't change. It's a similar handwriting throughout the thing, and so there's X amount of words will fit on each page. You can figure out statistically, and the order goes, if you do that way, is Shabbos is the longest, and Chulin, Yavamas, and Hedron, Baba Kama. And Brachas is number 11. And Bava Basra was not even in the running, but that wasn't even Shaila. Anyway, it seems that Brachas might have the most words per page. But anyway, the point is, Bava Basra is not even in the running. Fine. Okay. One is more than welcome to see this article of Dr. Aviz from this this Dr. Zivotofsky on this Sfarim blog, and he also tried to track down this Gra. What does it even mean with the Gra? It doesn't sound like it's an authentic Gra, which we know there are many, many Gras that are not authentic, so we'll just add this to one of them. There were attempts to explain what he might have meant, but not for now. Okay, moving on. We always discuss the Nusach of the Gemara, what's out there. So we have Professor Shraga Abramson wrote put out an edition of the Talmud on Baba Basra. We have the Dikduke Seifrim on Masechtas Baba Basra, and we'll see soon which Sfarim he had a manuscript. It'll play out a little bit, and then there's the Yerushalmi, just to mention one parish which we've quoted in the past from V'daikis and Sivas Yerushalmi. Okay, so now the first question I'd like to deal with is, does Rashi die in this Masechta? So if you look in your standard, if you look Lamashal in your standard Shas Vilna, on Daf Chav Tes, all of a sudden in the middle of Rashi, it says, Ad Kam Perish Rashi, Mikam Ve'elech Perish of Shmuel Bar Meir. Who is that? The Rashbam. This Lashon is already found in the early Shas, Bramberg edition. Okay, fine. On the side of the Shas Vilna, someone added in that in the Tfus Pizarro, in Italian printing, which is before the Bramberg edition, it says, Kan Meis Rashi. Okay? So, now Tfus Pizarro, if you're going to look to see where it says these three words, you'll see their pagination is not the same as Bramberg, which is the way our Shas today we go. Daf Yomi L'mashal goes up the Bramberg edition. This is before. This is 1510. So they have stuck in that they have a Messiah, Kinira, that Rashi died. Now the answer is how they have such Messiah is because when they were printing their Shas, they used the manuscripts that they used. Someone must have written this in there. Okay. So the question is, does Rashi die here or not? So Lamashal, looking back, sometimes the answer could be found in looking back in the manuscripts. So this Eli Genauer, who's the sponsor of the Shir, he's fascinated with Rashi. So he actually sent me, in one of the manuscripts, he found that it was an interesting lashon, that Rashi, it wasn't that Rashi died in the middle necessarily. He specifically left for the Rashbam, his Talmud, his grandson, to be able to complete his parish on it. I mean, say he felt nothing to do with him dying. Now, the reason why this might make sense is Lamashal, we have a problem which is already raised by the famous Kairi Hadairis in the historical work. He talks about that there's a kasha. It says over here, according to one nusach, the nusach that was saying Rashi dies, but if you look elsewhere, which is weird, at the end of Makkas, it says Rabbeinu Gufay Tar v'yatz nishmasa b'tayr loy perish yaser mikam ve'elech lashon Talmud Rivan, his son-in-law, etc. So we see, so it's interesting what's going on. It's a steer in these things. So he says that this Karyadaris writes that Rosh Shlomo Al-Ghazi, this type of question, what's going on? It says in one place we say Rashi dies in Baba Basra, and here he's dying over here. So like this, it would sound like maybe he died in Makkas, and what happened is in Baba Basra he didn't die, he left this Masechta for him. Interestingly enough, did Rashi even write a pirush on Baba Basra, or there's anything from Rashi on Baba Basra? So from Chavtes and onwards. So Yad Chaim Sefer points out that yes, there is. You could see the Rashbam quotes his Rebbe, the Rashi, a few times at least in this thing. So it could be there really was a work or some form of a work of Rashi on Baba Basra, on the rest of the Masechta, so to speak. Okay. L'maisa, there's another early historical work, Divrei Yosef from Yosef Sambarai. So he also talks about this issue with Rashi and everything, and the Rashbam. He says like this. He's talking about the greatness of Rashi. He wrote this Pirish. No one was, except for Baba Basra, which is interesting because we've already discussed a few other Masechtas that Rashi didn't write on, but he says except and he goes that he dies in Cheskes Abatim, and the Rashbam came along and he finished it, but he said he wasn't. But his Pirish, he points out, is very long. It could be that he even actually wrote a Pirish on more, and he also has interesting lashon that. He wrote Barichos Achas B'Bavas Rivil Haris Lazikne Rashi. He went to show it him to get sort of a smicha from his Zayda, and it seems that Rashi was impressed with it. Okay, but it sounds like also that maybe Rashi, from this nusach, it sounds like that maybe Rashi felt that it was too long. Okay, these are conversations that there's no real answers at the end of the day. Did the Rashbam write and the rest of Shas, besides other Masechtas that we know about? Okay. L'maisa, but about this thing of Rashi dying, so we actually once mentioned a drop about it, and we'll just mention a drop right now. The Shiari Knesset Agdola brings down an old Messiah that one has to be careful learning certain Masechtas. He says like this: Rashi dies when? He's talking about that they didn't learn the following Masechtas: Erevin Nida v'Yavamis, and then some people didn't learn Baba Basra. Why not? Because Rashi got sick and died. So then he says, "Well, Devreim Yosi Yesh L'Chashmim Masechtas Makkas Shemeis Barashi." To say he has his Messiah is that Rashi only gets sick in Baba Basra, but he dies in Makis, which would ends up answering this theory. Fine. But he says, Lamaisa, if you learn it by yeshiva, the chashash would only be if you're learning it yourself, maybe. We discussed this when we discussed about learning Makis, not Makis, Ma'ikatan, Barichos, we discussed this also. And we'll just mention this Messiah that I brought down from Reb Chaim Vital, an incredible sefer that was printed from manuscript called Sefer HaPulais. He says like this: Gam kol rav yeshiva shaloime b'yeshivasai echad migimel masechtes elu, which is Yevamis, Nida, and Basra, who mesukan sheyamas terem yashlam oisel kreisai. Why? Because Rashi was nifter in Masechtes Basra. Umayri da Arizal nifter ba'isik Masechtes Yevamis derech bekias im Talmidov. When he was giving bekias shir in Yevamis, he died. So Arizal dies when in Yevamis. Yevamis has some type of sakana, and Baba Basra Chaim Vital holds okay. Anyway, Lamaisa. Rabbi Chaim Sefer shows that there were some Achreinim that didn't know that Rashbam is the person who wrote the rest of the Pirish on this Masechta. Fine. Lamaisa, there's different Nuschais. Rabbi Chilak of Weinberg says, yes, Kan Meis Rashi and then Rashbam, but we know he has all these, there's two different Lashonos of how he gave this type of shmooze. I'll quote one of them. One, he says like this: when he gave his Shir Psicha for Baba Basra, he quoted, it says what? That the rest of the Masechta is Rashbam. Fine. And there's two different Gersais, if he dies or not. So said the Sridei Eish that only the Nusach that says Rashi, that Rashi never dies. So that Nusach is wrong. Because why? Because we always have him, and when we learn Kol Torah Kula, we have Rashi, so he never really dies, and it doesn't make a difference where he dies, whatever. Okay, fine. Anyway, Lamaisa, going on to the Pirish of the Rashbam for a second. So the Rashbam, we see it's Barichos Nifla, and that's what makes this Masechta so long. So interesting, Reb Fall, not the Rabbanovich, Baldik Duke Seifrim points out that if you look back into this Shast, which we quoted earlier, which is the one that has the Nusach of Kan Meis Rashi, there is more material there that might be from the Rashbam, which is short, which is not written in the long version of the Rashbam that we have, for X amount of blot, something like 25 blot. And that was lost, so to speak. And when he publishes it, Dukei Seifrim, he publishes it and he says, first he thinks it's Rabbeinu Gershom, and then he says, no, it's the Rashbam wrote a Kitzer Dika Pirish. Means Rashbam has this long Arichas Dika Pirish, which is what's found on Yeshas Vilna. And there was also, at least on 25 Blad, a Rashbam a Kitzer, and this was published more recently in 1985. What's significance of this is the Beis Yosef, they're able to prove that the Beis Yosef used this Gemara, this Tfus Fizaro from 1510, and he's using, when he's referring to the Rashbam, he's using this version, this short pirish that was lost and the Dudukei Seifrim located. Seder, Lamaisa, even in the Rashi's pirish, there are some materials in the first 29 blad. It seems that there is some pieces from the Rashbam. Okay, anyway, Lamaisa, let's move on. We have the Rashbam, we have Rashi. What else exists if one was learning the Rishonim? So throughout the ages, with the Tkufa of the Achronim, the Tkufa of the printing press, so this is how we always do it. They only had four Rishonim that existed, and this is the breakdown. The Ramban was published right away in the beginning of 1503, but it wasn't published that many times, and pretty much that was it for the Ramban. Fast forward a few hundred years, about 200 years, 1702 is the first time we get a chibur, the Rimigash. The Rimigash, which is beyond significant, we have his pirish on Baba Basra, and the first time we said it's pirish is 1702. What's the significance of the Rimigash? So everyone knows the Rambam was crazy into the Rimigash. In his Lashon Hagdam to Mishnayos, he writes his incredible Havana and Talmud Mafliya. He had this unbelievable koyach of Iyun Adshe Efsherli Loimer Alav Lefanav Loya Melech Kamayu B'Shitasei. We say something about the Rimigash impressed the Rambam out of Seif. Some people, even many people, when they talk about the Rimigash, say that he's the Rebbe of the Rambam. Turns out, this is a question, and it doesn't really make sense that he could be the Rebbe of the Rambam based on the years. It turns out he's the Rebbe of the father of the Rambam, and we have the Rebbe of Rambam and Rambam, the Maspik. He quotes that even though that the Nekuda is because he felt he was so into him. And that's why I called him Rabbi Isai, but it was really his father. Rabbi and Talmidish Rabbeinu Yosef. I mean, say it's not about it's not about that he himself learned by him. It's because through the learning of his father, who was his Rebbe. Okay, now so basically, 1702, it's published, and it's published a few other times. In 1973, it's published again by who? Moshe Shmuel Shapiro. This time, when it's they add in a bunch of new pieces that they discover. Where they discover it, we'll see shortly. And even today, they find more pieces of the Rimigash. But the point is, we're having a significant rishon that we, as far as we're going, Al Pi the Seder Bava Basra, we have not come across other Perushim of his on a whole Masechta. Did it exist? It seems that there were on other Masechtas. This Yisrael Tashma deals with at length in his article about him, found in Knesset Mechker in Volume 2. The next work that's published is the Shitin Gubetzes. When is this published? In 1774. But it's not complete. Only in 1790, 1791 is the rest of the parish printed in the back of the Yad Ramah, which we'll get to in a second. And when you look at the Shitin Gubetzes, which we've done in the past, you open up the Shar already, you could see how incredible the Shitin Gubetzes is already making the difference for learning the Masechta, because it's an excellent collection of all the various Rishonim that he had and the manuscripts he had, and he refers to over here. He has the Rashba, he has Aliyas Rabbeinu Yoina, he has the Ritva, he has the Ramban, he has the Rimagash, and others also. So when it's published in 1774, it gets a skama from the Chida, which is important for other aspects that we've discussed in other episodes, not for now. So now, but the Yad Ramah, when's the Yad Ramah? This is Ramei Abulafia, which we have discussed because other materials of his have been published in other Masechtas, but this is where he becomes famous, his Yad Ramah and Bava Basra on Sanhedrin. So he's also an early Rishon. It's also, when's it published? In 1790, right around the same, this is Daino a little after Shitin Gubetzes is published in the 1770s, and as I said, in the back of this is some more parts of the Shitin Gubetzes that wasn't published. This also has a beautiful Askama from the Chazdei David, and this great Rishon is also the subject of a lot of discussion. Tashma is a book from a Professor Septimus, and others have a lot about it. Okay, so the point is that Bava Basra, for at least for these few hundred years, there's 4 Rishonim that one might have been able to locate in these places from the 1500s and onwards. But the question is there more? So like this, when you look in the Diktukei Seifrim, which is bringing us to 1881, he has more. He has a Ritva that he had from the library of Rosh Shlomo Halberstam, which we spoke about. He has Aliyas Rabbeinu Yoina, which he got from a manuscript present from Martha Ettinger, which is interesting. He refers to this in the Shar of his copy of the Aliyas Rabbeinu Yoina, which we have today. You could locate a copy of this manuscript online, and it says there he got it from, who he got it from. This is the Chavrusa and brother-in-law of the Shalom Meshiv. We spoke about him all the way back in the episode about Mashim Matzah controversy. He's the Chavrusa of the Shalom Meshiv. They wrote Magen Gibarim together. So he also had manuscripts, and he gave it to the Diktukei Seifrim. We also have Chedushim of the Eshkol on Shas. This is one of the first Masechtas that we have this material. Who has this? The Diktukei Seifrim, and also he had other materials of the Rimagash. So he's unique, which we've discussed in the past. He has materials that no one else has. The question is there any other materials on Masechtas Bava Basra? So far, we have this Masechta that's murder to learn. It's a long Masechta, and we don't have any Rishayim. The story goes like this. Shas Vilna, in the 1880s, they seek out all different information out there, so they get, on the side of you open up Yishas Vilna, they have Rabbeinu Gershom. Is it really where they get this from? They get this from Alexander Kahot. He was the person, the big expert on the Sefer Aruch, and he put out the Aruch at one point in time, a massive set of today it's a bunch of volumes of the Aruch, and he's an interesting person. He ends up making it to America. His second wife, wrote interesting autobiography in English, which he discusses him and life in America in the 1880s and onwards. But the Shas Vilna got it from him. The Madir, the person who was the footnoter, so to speak, and put it out, is the Goyin Rosh Hashanah Av Bezin in Vilna. Okay, Lamaisa, even with all that, there still were mistakes crept into this work, and Rosh Hashanah Zalman in more than one place seems to say that even though he's pro using new manuscripts of Rishonim, sometimes Allah Lamaisa, he was nervous because of the mistakes in this particular manuscript. Okay, but interestingly enough, people seek out always, is there a makar for making a kiddush for a girl? So it's been pointed out to me many years ago by my chavrusa of mine, B'Shem a famous person in Israel, a Talmud of Gusman. His name is Reb Hillel Ravel. That in Rabbeinu Gershom, it sounds like there's a makar how he has a certain gersh in the Gemara to make a kiddush for a girl, which is very good because people always look for it. People say it's very late, and it's possibly, if you learn up this piece in Rabbeinu Gershom, such a thing, and then this new edition of Rabbeinu Gershom, which I'm about to mention, that just came out 2-3 years ago, they bring down a few more contemporary people that also picked up on this line in Rabbeinu Gershom. Okay, Lamais in 1998, a different edition came out of Rabbeinu Gershom based on some other manuscripts. And today, 2 years ago, a year ago, a fellow went and put in showing all various Rosh Hashiva Chakiras, rayas from Rabbeinu Gershom that you could bring for various raid Yukim based on Rabbeinu Gershom. Okay. Lamais, a friend of mine, published an article that Yosef Dubovik, his name is, also of pieces that he found of more pieces of Rabbeinu Gershom that he discovered in manuscript and was published in one of these journals that I could send out a PDF. It's just a few blocks. The question is, who is this the Rabbeinu Gershom? Who is this? Is it one person? Is it a few people? This relates to the famous Rabbeinu Gershom? Everyone knows the Cherem de Rabbeinu Gershom. What's that even? So there's a lot of literature we're not going to go through. But the point is, the first basically thing that gets published that's new in the 1880s already starts with Rabbeinu Gershom. Fine. Moving on, we've always discussed is there Gaonic literature. So here, Masechtas Bava Basra does not have Eitzer Gainim. We've quoted in the past many times from this Yid, Bam Levine. We spoke a little bit about him even in the episodes on Chaim Kanievsky. But what happens? There were people that did collect materials of the Gainim of Mitzia, and in 2017, just a few short years ago, Professor Yachmiel Brody, the leading expert in Gainim, and some other people made a hemshech for this Levine project on Gainim, and they published a massive volume about Basra, combed together from all different places of the materials of the Gainim on the Masechta. Kedai to look at. It is even an article, which I always find very important, where someone wrote, which I'm happy to send, the benefit of a few sample sugyas, the maila of having now the Eitzer Gainim, what it helps for in understanding different sugyas. Fine. Seder. So that's the Gainim. What about Rishonim? Are there any new discoveries in Rishonim? The answer is yes. And this, we get to someone that not always that I get around to talking about him properly, and that is known as Moshe Bloi, the Bloi Svarim on Shas, the Shittas HaKamayim. Today, in many shul libraries, yeshiva libraries, they have two massive shelves of tons and tons of Svarim. Most places, they still gather dust, but there are plenty of people that seem there's a bikush for them. And what this fellow did, remarkable, printed like a crazy amount, something like 36 volumes, and some of these volumes could have 5-6 different Rishonim on Masechtas, on Gan Shas, even halachic works. Incredible project that this person took on. He began, it seems, in the early 50s. He learned in the Mir in Shanghai. He was affiliated with Chabad, and his story is obviously something worth telling, but not right now. But Masechtas Bava Basra, I think, is when he really becomes put on the map. Why? Because he puts out the Ritva on Masechtas Bava Basra. Everyone knows a major discovery such as the Ritva. That's when you're learning and you have a Ritva, that's something else. And he discovers this in the 1950s, and he gets impressive list of Haskamas. The Haskamas also tell a fascinating tale, but not for now. But just to mention some of the names: Rabbi Al Meltzer, Baron Kotler, Rav Herzog, Rav Moshe Feinstein, the David Mesharim, the Tribune Rav, and many others. And you could see that he got very impressive Haskamas endorsing his project, which it seems this was the Kickstarter that got him moved on further. It seems this Ksav was authenticated because already it had a Chsim of the Chida, and etc. In more recent years, the Maestro Cook has published based on more manuscripts of the Ritva, which is always the story. Fine. But this is not where the story of Blau ends. If we're going to talk about Masechtas Bava Basra, he ends up publishing a volume where he makes amazing discoveries. Number one, Rabbeinu Chananel. So we're used to many of the Masechtas that we've spoken about already had Rabbeinu Chananel. The Vilna Shas has it on the side. This Masechta is one of the first Masechtas that doesn't have it. But are there pieces? If you look in Rav Kasher Sari Elef, you'll see there are many places that there are materials from Rabbeinu Chananel. There was a Chibur 30 years ago that collected a bunch of materials of the Rabbeinu Chananel. And even as recent as a few years ago, Professor Simcha Emanuel discovered in a fragmented pieces in the library, in the Gnizis of the European Gnizis, as it's called, a Pirish Ashkenazi on Masechtas Bava Basra, and there also seems to have new pieces of Rabbeinu Chananel. So they're always discovering it. But Bloi in the 80s publishes on Bava Basra a bunch of new materials of Rabbeinu Chananel. In the same volume, Prince Baruch someone he calls him Rabbeinu Baruch Me'eretz Yavan. Also another Rishon which is discussed. Now, just to fast forward, where is this coming from? So there's a Pirush of Zechariah Agamati, Sefer HaNer, which we've discussed in other Masechtas, which is written around 1190. In 1960, a Tfus Tzilum, just of the Ksav Yad, is published. And from here, we have the materials that I mentioned that was published earlier from the Rimagash by the great Rosh Hashiva, Rav Shapiro. So he used this when he was working on his Rimagash, and others, that was their source. So that's what Bla used for Rabbeinu Chananel and Baruch Me'eretz Yavan. But he also has from the Eshkol, which I mentioned, who has this the Diktukei Seifrim, but he finds more. Now, what's significant is this is known as the Ravid Hasheni, or sometimes he's called the Raivi. So there's a lot of material about him in Tashmaz's works and the Shalom Yaloim in his work. Bloy also discovers yet another Rishon, Rabbeinu Asher bar Shlomo Milunil. This is also a Rishon that's not so well known about him, but Tashma, in his incredible work on the Baal Hamar, he deals with this Rishon. So again, we're showing that Bloy publishes 4 Rishonim, and a 5th Rishon is Rabbeinu Yitzchak Kresker. So basically what's happening is all of a sudden you see the Masechta is getting more and more. We discover the Ritva, these 5 Rishonim, so the list gets all of a sudden got much higher. Then you have the Rajba. First time published is 1957. This is its own incredible story, which we don't have time to tell now, but we mentioned briefly the Cheverner Gadol, Rabbi Yisrael Dvortz, who was very Isaac in Zram also. So this is tied into the Hashpah of the Rabbi Zal Meltzer project on the Ramban. So him, Rabbi Chatzkel Sarna, and his son, they publish this Rajba from Ksav Yad on Masechtas Bava Basra. So now all of a sudden this Masechta is becoming much more geschmack, not geschmack, but that we have the Rishonim that we could finally help us. We have the Rajba finally, we have the Ritva finally, and we have all these other Rishonim. But then another discovery, Aliyas Rabbeinu Yoina. We don't have so much of Rabbeinu Yoina on Shas. This happens in 1965, again in 1979, which is also beyond important. But then the story continues. 1971, this Ramesha Herschel, who's the one who publishes the Aliyas Rabbeinu Yoina, who I mentioned already, who had this in manuscript of the Diktukei Seifrim, he publishes a work he calls a Pirish Kadma in the Masechtas Bava Basra. Turns out, in 1989, by then they're able to identify it's this Rabbi Shmuel ben Chachmoin. The shaila is, who is this person? A lot has been published from him in more recent years. Originally, they thought he was closer to the Rambam's Kufa and his base medrash, but turns out, no, he's not. He's a little later. This is the latest research from this Adil Breuer, an article in Yeshua and Lamed Hey. Okay. Anyway, then the Ran is published for the first time in 1962. The Taisis Yishanim in 1989. The Meiri in 1956. All of a sudden, so I'm trying to show is from the 50s and onwards, Bava Basra gets Rishonim galore. I've shown this has happened before in other of these shiurim in this series, especially Ma'id Katam. So here you see what's happening in Bava Basra. Fine. This is how we'll just go very briefly with the Achrayim over here. It's like this. Pnei Yeshua, there's no Pnei Yeshua about it. So one cute story I came across is Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach had a tremendous chiba and bekius in Pnei Yeshua, and he says, how does he know that there's no Pnei Yeshua on Bava Basra? He says, because he always constantly cross-references himself in all different places, and he never once even mentions that there's a Pnei Yeshua on Bava Basra. Fast forward, a bunch of years later, comes out a sefer, which is very well known, Pnei Shloima, from Rav Shlomo Gansfried. Who is Rav Shlomo Gansfried? He's famous for being the author of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. So he gets, his sefer is considered the Achron on, in many circles, for many years, the Achron on Masechtas Bava Basra. When's it first published? In 1846. So Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach said that they sort of gave him, in Min Shamayim, they were mazaket him the schus to be ki'ilu the Pnei Yeshua on this Masechta. And he said this over. Now, Yosef Buxbaum, the head of Mechon Yerushalayim, who's a Talmud of Rav Shlomo Zalman, he heard this from Rav Shlomo Zalman. One time, he got very nervous. He thought he found a manuscript that was the Pnei Yeshua on Bava Basra. So he's stuck. On one hand, there's a major mapecha, but he knew what Rav Shlomo Zalman said, that a proof that there's no Pnei Yeshua on Masechtas Bava Basra. So the whole time he's learning this Ksav he's trying to figure out whatever. At the end, he was able to verify it's not the Pnei Yeshua. I think Rav Shlomo Zalman would have been happy if it would have been the Pnei Yeshua and he would have been proven wrong. He would have been able to handle it. Anyway, the point is that was the Masechta. It's one of the Achrayim on the Masechta. But what's interesting is he doesn't have any of these amazing Rishonim that we have in our generation, which changes the limit of the whole Masechta. Just to mention briefly, is there any other Achrayim? So just to mention the following fast, Chayes and Yeshua is from Yitzchak Meizlish in 1808. There's a Sefer Ein Yisrael 1822, which has Chashav Askamas from the Chassam Sofer and David Deitch. Then there's a later Sefer in the 1890s, Rabbi Avram Yaffa, called Machsa Avram, a beautiful Askamas from Rabbi Tzchal Chanan. Okay, Lamaisa, what about Yadus of Achrayim? So there's plenty galore. Just to mention the Machsa Shekel, who for me is very important, and for many people in Klal Yisrael, he's the major Mefarish of the Magen Avram. He dies in 1806. So in 1958, they publish a work of his from Ksav Yad on Masechtas Bava Basra, and now in 1807, there's an interesting lashon. His son-in-law writes when they published the Machsa Shekel after he dies that he was the Rav in Baskowitz for 60 years, and he says vehemid kama alofim talmidim, thousands of talmidim. Now this is a remarkable number. Anyway, If one wants to read more about him, in Yeshurun Volume 24, Reb David Kamenetsky published a Yad of a hesped that he gave on Nassim Adler, who he was zeicha to meet. Same time in the Chassam Sofer, when they came to when they were thrown out of Frankfurt, a whole different story, which we actually mentioned maybe a little bit in the episode on the Hafla. And he gives a beautiful hesped, a bunch of pages, and one could read some interesting things over there. And this is found in Yeshurun Chav Daled. Okay, just to mention, to conclude, we have Rebbe Gutmacher, who we devoted a whole episode to him. There's a whole volume of Chon Yerushalayim published on Masechtas Bava Basra. Reb David Rapport, the great Rosh Yeshiva, Shiur Migdash David, is published from manuscript. And we have the Naim Lemishpat from Yitzchak Arieli, the Chavrusa of Rav Kook. One wants to read about him. Reb Eitam Henkin, Hashem Yinkom Dama, wrote a lot about him, this great gadol, and so the Naim Lemishpat is a very, very useful sefer, also found on Hebrew books. And the last but not least is Frankel Mafteach did an incredible job making a massive, fat volume, and there's plenty others of Yeshiva Shetayr Svarim, Ein L'Davar Seif to them, but this is just to mention a tipush abiyam of what happened, how Bava Basra was learned. You see that our generation was blessed with unbelievable amounts of Rishonim. Someone could properly learn through this Masechta and penetrated in ways that has not been penetrated before. And just to conclude, we will, Amir Tzashem, have an episode where we will deal with specifically the Gemaras of Rabbi Bar Chana. There's a bunch of Svarim specifically written for those Gemaras. At the time closer to that, we will deal with those Svarim a little bit.
Amazing. Wow. So in under half an hour, you gave a wealth of information. And once again, we thank the Genauer family for their dedication in memory of Mr. Couple Genauer from Seattle, Washington. And we hope that the learning should be an Eloi for his neshama. Thank you, Rabbi Brut. Looking forward to seeing you again soon.